Donald Trump has a 64% chance of winning the 2024 election, his highest odds ever against Kamala Harris. This means that at any point since the vice president entered the race, she has never performed worse than she is right now. In this video, we'll be taking a look at Polymarket's updated 2024 election forecast, as well as their state-by-state markets to see where Harris and Trump stand on the path to 270 electoral votes. You can see that over the last 3 months, the race between Trump and Harris has been incredibly competitive, with no candidate reaching odds of over 55% until Trump started to surge just a few weeks ago. And since then, he has now taken on a 28% lead in the betting markets. Coming back to the map, I've already filled in the solid states for both nominees. These are races that Harris or Trump have a 95% chance or more of winning. We're only going to focus on the 17 most competitive races that are still left in gray. It's these states that are actually going to decide who the 47th president is going to be. And now to start getting this map colored in, we're going to begin with the likely states for Donald Trump, races where he has between a 75 to a 95% chance of winning. These states are going to be more competitive than the solid states, but Trump will still maintain a clear advantage. We'll start in the lower Midwest with Iowa and Ohio, two races where Trump's odds of victory sit at exactly 94%, right under the 95% threshold for a race to be solid. Trump has led consistently throughout the year, and there's no doubt he is going to win Iowa and Ohio for a third time in a row after first flipping the two states back in 2016 and then carrying them by the exact same margins against Joe Biden in 2020. Moving down south to the Sun Belt, Trump is also the favorite in Texas, a state he carried by 9 points in 2016 and by just over 5 in 2020. The last Republican to win the Lone Star State by a solid margin was Mitt Romney in 2012. It is unlikely that in 2024 Trump will carry Texas by 15 points or more, but he can definitely win the state by a double-digit margin. Just like in Iowa and Ohio, he has exactly a 94% chance of winning the state. In fact, his odds right now are higher than they've ever been. We do have a surprisingly competitive Senate race between Ted Cruz and Colin Allred, but the presidential election is not going to be impacted much by that. Donald Trump is the clear favorite. He's going to win Texas by his largest margin yet. And in Florida, we have another state where Trump is about to break a personal record, mainly as a result of the state's sharp shift to the right since he first came onto the political scene. In 2016, when he first was elected president, he defeated Clinton in the Sunshine State by just 1%. He then tripled his margin in 2020 when nobody thought he was even going to win the state at all. This time, he is going to at least double his 2020 margin. Florida is going to go to Trump by around 7 to 10 points, and the betting markets give him a 94% chance at victory. Once again, right under the 95% threshold. His odds here are also at an all-time high, just like in Texas, and the state is also going to be likely Republican. And finally, to finish off all the likely red states, we have Alaska, another race where Trump has a 94% chance of winning. It's about to be solid. I mean, we have 5 states where Trump is sitting at just under 95. As the market continues to move in Trump's favor, these states are all going to be dark red very, very soon. And lastly, we have the 2nd District of Maine, where Trump has a 92% chance of victory. And so with these solid and likely states now filled in for Donald Trump, he takes the lead with 219 electoral votes. We're now going to color in the likely states for Kamala Harris. These states are obviously going to be more competitive than the safe blue states, but they are going to be races where she is very likely to win. We'll start off in New Mexico, where the vice president has a 91% chance of victory. It's a state that Joe Biden carried by 11 points in the last election, a race that got very competitive right before Joe Biden dropped out after that disastrous debate performance. New Mexico will definitely get competitive again in the future, especially as Hispanic voters continue to shift to the right. And of course, New Mexico is the only state with a Hispanic majority electorate. But for now, Kamala Harris and the Democrats are going to be able to hold on to New Mexico. It's it's going to be likely Democrat on our map. Next up, in Minnesota, we have a race that Kamala Harris is only on track to win because she chose Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate. In fact, Minnesota was quite competitive before that. Donald Trump at one point had a 44% chance of winning a state that no Republican has carried since 1972. The fact that his odds sit at more than 10% is pretty bad news for the Democrats. Despite running with the state's literal governor on the ticket with her, Kamala Harris has been struggling in Minnesota. She leads by less than 4 points in the polls when Joe Biden won Minnesota in 2020 by a 7-point margin. But in terms of winning the state outright, Kamala Harris is still likely to carry Minnesota, even if it's not by the largest margin. And so on the map, it is going to be likely blue. Before we continue, over 70% of you guys are not subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. And join my Discord server to chat with me personally. Link in the description below. We're now going to move up to the Northeast where we find the state of Maine. Kamala Harris is the clear favorite with an 87% chance of victory, Trump at 14. The state is not nearly as competitive as it was earlier this summer when Trump's odds surged as high as 41 points. Remember, this is a state that Joe Biden carried by a double-digit margin nearly in the last election. Today, the race is going to be closer, but just like in Minnesota in terms of winning the state outright, the vice president remains the favorite. It's also going to be likely blue. In addition to that, we have New Hampshire, a state decided by less than half a percentage point back in 2016. Joe Biden did do much better, though. He defeated Trump here 4 years later by over 7 points, and today, Kamala Harris has an 85% chance of winning New Hampshire. The race actually got very close, just like in Maine back in the summer. Trump came very close to taking the lead, but since Harris has entered the race, Democrats are in a slightly better position, and she is likely to win the Granite State when all the votes are counted. So we have another likely blue state up in New England. And the final likely state on this map is going to be the Commonwealth of Virginia, where Kamala Harris has an 85% chance of winning. Trump at 16. This is actually a pretty poor performance on the part of the vice president, considering that Joe Biden did win Virginia by a double-digit margin just 4 years ago. Today, though, the race is significantly more competitive. Harris is polling ahead by just 3 points, and before Joe Biden dropped out of the race, Trump actually took the lead in the polling average. He was set to win Virginia entirely. He can definitely be competitive here, but he's definitely performed worse against Harris than he did against Biden a few months back. Virginia is only going to get more competitive from here as the state continues to shift back to the right, but for now, Democrats maintain a slight advantage, and it's going to be the last likely state on the map. We do also have the 2nd District of Nebraska, where Harris has an 88% chance of winning. And so with these solid and likely states filled in for both candidates, Trump and Harris are neck and neck, both at around 220 electoral votes, with just 7 states remaining. We're now going to fill in our last category of states. These are going to be the lean states, where either candidate will have between a 55 to a 75% chance of winning. There are no tilt states on this map, which means that every remaining state clearly favors one nominee or the other. We're going to begin with the lean Trump states, and this is where things start to get really bad for Kamala Harris. She might have a 7 electoral vote lead right now, but that advantage is going to disappear quickly. Starting off in the Grand Canyon state, Donald Trump has a whopping 71% chance of winning this race in just 2 weeks. In fact, his odds are as high right now as they were before Joe Biden even dropped out of the race. This means that after all the trouble Democrats went through to replace the nominee at the top of their ticket, nothing has really changed. Donald Trump is dominating this election, and it's clear in Arizona that he is going to win the state back after losing it narrowly to Biden 4 years ago. In the polls, Trump leads by 1.6%. There's no doubt Arizona is going to be lean Republican. Next up in Georgia, we have another state that very narrowly went to Joe Biden in the last election, but one that Trump is clearly on track to take back today. The graph actually looks pretty similar to what we're seeing in Arizona. Trump has a 70% chance of winning. His odds surged even more in just the last 3 days. He's been ahead throughout the entirety of the election cycle, and with the election looming, his odds just keep going higher and higher. The polls have him ahead by 1.8%. In fact, he leads in virtually every single survey that's come out from the Peach State over the last 2 weeks. Georgia is going to go back into the Trump column, and it's going to be lean Republican as well. Moving on up to North Carolina, generally this would be the most conservative of all 7 swing states. It's the only one that Trump actually won in the last election. He carried it by just over 1%. The reason why Trump's odds in North Carolina are lower than his chances in Arizona and Georgia is because of Mark Robinson, the Republican candidate for governor. He is running a terrible campaign, and he is going to lose. But he's not likely to impact Trump that much. It's obviously going to be a negative impact, but it's not going to be enough to cause Trump to lose the Tar Heel state entirely. That's why you did see a drop in chances for the former president right when Robinson was hit with another major scandal in early September. But his odds have recovered since then, and just like in Georgia and Arizona, his chances here are on the rise. He leads in an overwhelming majority of polls from North Carolina. He's up by 0.5% on average, and the state is going to be lean Republican on our map as well. And to this point, Trump needs just 1 out of the 4 remaining states to win the election. It actually can't be Nevada, but Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania will all do, and the most likely scenario is that he will cross 270 electoral votes with the keystone state of Pennsylvania, 19 electoral votes, a state where Trump has a 61% chance of winning. Pennsylvania has always been very competitive between the two candidates. Trump's highest lead ever was only 67%. Over the last 3 months, the race in the Keystone State has been incredibly competitive, with Harris and Trump going back and forth. But now that we're on the final stretch, Trump's lead is only continuing to increase. It's now a 60-40 race in favor of the former president. This is in large part because of him taking the lead in the polling average. He leads in 6 of the 7 most recent polls from the state, and according to Real Clear Politics, he's on track to win by just under 1%. So Pennsylvania is also going to be lean for the GOP, and it's likely to be the tipping point state that wins Trump the election. Trump isn't done though yet. He is determined to win this election in a modern-day landslide, and it seems like that is quite possible. Trump is also the heavy favorite in Michigan, where he has a 57% chance of winning. And this is probably one of the states where you can most clearly see the fall of Kamala Harris. Just half a month ago, the vice president had a 68% chance of winning the Wolverine state, nearly a 2-3 chance of carrying a state Joe Biden won by nearly 3 points 4 years ago. Today, her odds have fallen rather gradually, actually, all the way down to just 43%. Basically, the worst position she's been in since before she even entered the election. So Michigan is also going to be lean for Donald Trump. It's going to be an additional prize on top of the states he actually needs to win. Harris is also going to suffer a tough loss in Wisconsin, where she has just a 43% chance of winning. And just like in Michigan, Harris was the favorite throughout all of August and September, but as we entered October, her campaign basically collapsed. Trump is now the clear favorite, and he's on track to win Wisconsin as well, another state he won back in 2016, along with its 2 upper Midwestern neighbors. These 3 states have voted together in every single election since 1992, whether it's for a Democrat or for a Republican, and Trump is going to keep that tradition alive. The state is going to be lean red, especially as the former president has recently taken the lead in the polling average. And finally, we're left with just Nevada, although I do think you guys are starting to see a pattern emerge. The Silver State is also going to be lean Republican. Trump has a 56% chance of winning here. He's recently taken the lead in the polls, but it is a state that no Republican has won since 2004, so this would be a major victory for Donald Trump, but it is very much in line with his expected performance across the board, which is going to be extremely dominant. This is going to be the biggest presidential election victory for any candidate of any party since 2012. According to Polymarket's 2024 election forecast, Trump has a 64% chance of winning the election in just 2 weeks. On the electoral map, he's on track to win 312 to Kamala Harris's 226. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. And follow me on Twitter for daily political updates. Link in the description below.